Deadpool and Wolverine's officially in theaters, so let's talk about some of those spoilery details right now. Hello everybody, I'm Dan Murrell here with my spoiler review of Deadpool and Wolverine now that the movie is in theaters. It had big preview grosses last night. We're going to cover that next week on Charts with Dan. But let's talk about some of the things that are in the movie. And if you haven't seen the movie, this is your time to click away because there are so many really fun surprises in Deadpool and Wolverine that you owe it to yourself to not spoil for yourself before going in. So I'm going to buy some time and tap dance here for another 10 seconds or so by saying that this is your blanket and final spoiler warning because we're going to jump into spoilers right after this little pause to let you run in from the kitchen and pause this video. So one final actual spoiler warning for Deadpool and Wolverine right now. All right, so let's jump into the spoilers, and I'm going to start with the one word that just sort of has been echoing around my head when I think about Deadpool and Wolverine, and that word is Blade. If you had let me list the top 20 characters that I thought would pop up in the movie, not characters that I wanted to be in the movie, but that I thought they could get in the movie, I don't think that Wesley Snipes as Blade would have been on that list. Maybe it's because of all the stories about the making of Blade Trinity, which admittedly was, like 20 years ago, or because Marvel is actively trying to develop a new Blade movie, but I guess I just never figured that Wesley Snipes would come back and do it. But it was great to see him in the movie. He looked like he was having a lot of fun, and that joke that was in the movie where he says, there's only been one Blade, there'll only ever be one Blade, that could have just been a meta joke with Deadpool looking into the camera, kind of saying, well, maybe not. But I wonder if that's kind of a hint that they might be backtracking or rethinking the idea of completely moving on from Wesley Snipes, whether or not he comes back as Blade or in some other capacity. I'm probably overthinking. It was probably just a meta joke about the fact that they are working with Mahershala Ali on doing a new Blade movie, but also a new creative direction on that movie wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world. I mean, it has been stuck in development for 5 years. I was actually looking at some pictures that got sent out from Comic-Con last night. They did a surprise screening of Deadpool and Wolverine there, and they brought out all the surprise cameos on stage in Hall H at the end of it, and Wesley Snipes, of course, was there with a lot of the other cast, and it was so weird because I was in the audience in Hall H in 2019 when Kevin Feige announced that they were doing a Blade movie. And here we are 5 years later, and Kevin Feige is on that same stage with Wesley Snipes as Blade, reprising the role before Marvel could actually crack getting its own new Blade movie off the ground. So that was just a lot of fun. And of all of the different cameos in the movie, or supporting character cameos, or however you want to categorize it, Blade was the one I think that surprised me the most, and that I thought was actually kind of the coolest. I was actually looking forward to seeing the movie a second time with a big crowd because I like to go and take notes if I'm going to do a spoiler review, specifically for the reaction to the Blade cameo, and I've got to say I had a pretty soft crowd. The reaction really wasn't that big for Blade or for a lot of other things. I'm not really sure why that is. I don't know if they were just not a reactive crowd or if they weren't into the older Fox movies or whatever reason. It didn't get that pop that I was hoping for. And it's a little disappointing because one of my favorite things as far as movie-going experiences was when I went to see Spider-Man No Way Home the second time, knowing what was coming. And the audience treated it like it was a football game. The cheers and just the volume of it, it was such a great time. And I think that that's a case where that audience enthusiasm is warranted. And I have to admit that I'm kind of jealous reading reactions from other people that were in theaters where they got that pop for Blade and for a lot of other things in the movie, but it just didn't happen for me. As for some of the other cameos, I thought the Chris Evans fake out was very funny. It did catch me by surprise. I also like that they brought him back for the end credits scene and the fact that Johnny Storm's trash talking actually did end up getting him killed by Nova. And I think that what the Chris Evans thing did was to really set the stage for what they were attempting to do with this, which is really more than bringing in MCU characters to say goodbye to the Fox universe and to bring in all of those different Fox characters. And again, just reading some of the initial reactions, it seems like there are some people that were disappointed that it wasn't more MCU heavy. But I think that it's more in line with Deadpool, that this was very much more about the Fox characters than the MCU characters. And the fact that you bring in Evans as the Human Torch, I think just kind of set that expectation early on. Channing Tatum as Gambit was another fun one that I honestly never would have guessed beforehand, because, like, you just don't think that people are going to think of putting an unrealized hero in a movie like this. And I like that we get a little bit of dose, maybe, of what his Gambit would have been, although it was a little bit more of a parody. I didn't mind the humor. I actually think Deadpool's line about if his dialect coach were the Minions was one of the funniest jokes in the movie. And, he's having fun with it. Ryan Reynolds is having fun with it. And the idea of using the Void as a way to explore not just the heroes that we've seen, but heroes that we never got to see, I think was a pretty clever way of spinning that concept. Jennifer Garner's Elektra was fun to see back. Her character isn't one that has a whole lot of nostalgia attached to it, but I think it was worth it for the Daredevil joke when Deadpool learns that he died and he says, "Oh, I'm so sorry," and Elektra just goes, "It's fine." Again, that's a way to use the characters in sort of a winky way, but not in a way that completely makes them into a joke or a punchline. The only one that I'm sort of on the fence about is Daphne Keane returning as X-23, because the promise in bringing Wolverine back was that they wouldn't dig Logan up and desecrate his corpse metaphorically, though it was done literally. I just love the ending for those characters so much, and as great as it was to see her come back and challenge our new Wolverine's idea of what it means to be a hero, it's the only part of the movie that I think kind of strayed close to undercutting the legacy of Logan and what that movie means. And it wasn't a deal breaker for me by any means, but all the other cameos that you brought in, I mean, it is essentially a dead cinematic universe, so it didn't really do anything to undercut any sort of, thoughts that I had on a previous film. But that's the one where it seems like they were maybe stepping on the back of that story just a bit. Although, admittedly, that scene between Wolverine and X-23 at the fire where, he's going into all of his trauma and she's explaining that, well, that's just being Wolverine. That was a really well-written scene. And her saying, I got to grow up because of you. And a lot of other kids did too. That really is I think what pulled me back from the brink a little bit, because it was a really well-written, well-acted scene that did address and build on the relationship between X-23 and this previous version of Logan. The returning X-Men villains didn't get that much to do. It was fun to see them. I wish they could have given them all the spotlight somehow in the way that Pyro and Sabretooth were featured. Henry Cavill as a Wolverine variant was fun and just a way to kind of stick in a little DC joke. And by the way, Deadpool was right. He was a pretty awesome Wolverine. And then Jon Favreau as Happy Hogan. Cool cameo, but I think it did muddle the Deadpool storyline a little bit as on a character level, which we'll talk about in just a second. I guess the variants of Wolverine would also count as their own cameos, and as a comics and trading card collector in the 80s and 90s, I recognize Patch in the white coat. The Age of Apocalypse Wolverine with one hand, I recognize. That was fun to see. I think the one on the porch was supposed to be Old Man Logan, at least from the style and everything. That's what I took away. And then, of course, we had the brown suit Wolverine who's fighting the Hulk, so even though we only get to see that suit briefly, that was cool. The Wolverine strapped to the X was a deep cut, apparently a comic book reference. That one I didn't quite get right off the back. And then, of course, we had the short and stocky Wolverine, the comic accurate Wolverine, that was still played, through visual effects by Hugh Jackman, which again, just a fun nod to the character and how he was initially conceived of in the comic books. And then, of course, the Deadpool core. I haven't read a lot of Deadpool comics. I'm sure that was a dream come true to folks that are more familiar with that than I am. It was still a lot of fun, but I do acknowledge that, it didn't quite hit with me as hard because I just wasn't familiar with a lot of those versions of Deadpool. Generally, I don't think that any of the cameos or cameo supporting performances were empty or just fan service, except for, maybe one exception here or there. And I think that they did what you need to do when you're bringing in characters like that, which is to, yes, bring them into the movie, but give them a reason to be there. And really, if anything, the characters that were kind of in the movie for empty reasons were the existing legacy characters from the Deadpool franchise itself. I get it, the movie has a lot to do, but basically breaking up Wade and Vanessa off screen and having Wade go through this massive sea change before the movie even starts undercut his development for me, and that's the muddled Deadpool storyline that I was talking about. I needed to see more of this determination to matter and to be a hero for it to fully land, and just dropping him into Happy's office didn't quite have the impact that it needed. Overall, his arc in the movie made sense. It wasn't like I didn't understand what he was going for. I just think that it needed more development in order to really and truly be a Deadpool story. I think we needed to find the time to flesh that out just a bit more. At least we did get to spend some time with Peter. Not much, but more than a lot of the other characters. And I gotta say, I was feeling his vibe and his chemistry with Hunter B-15. I actually think it would be funny in the future if whenever we go to the TVA, if Peter's just hanging out there. Like he's just, started this relationship and now he just gets to go hang there all the time. And listen, if there's one character that deserves to be timeless and immortal, it's Peter. He's a good guy. Some of the issues I had with Deadpool, I also had with Wolverine, because when we meet him, we're told that he's the worst Wolverine and that he destroyed his universe, but we never actually see his universe, and his original sin appeared to be going to the bar when humans came to hunt the X-Men, which resulted in their deaths. But how did a group of humans get the better of all the other X-Men? How would Logan being there have specifically turned the tide? Why does he blame himself so much for the death of his entire team? Again, it's not that it doesn't make sense, but if they had just devoted a little bit more time for it, then I think that the stakes would have been a lot more clear for this version of Logan and why he hates himself and why all of that self-doubt and guilt. The story took a better turn when he talked about going on a killing spree and ruining the reputation of the X-Men. I got that, but it was all tell, no show. And again, in a more streamlined story, I think we could have had time to actually see this happen or go deeper into it. But there was so much jammed into the movie that we just couldn't get there. Jackman's performance is what sells that storyline. You don't necessarily have to see his pain because he's so good at emoting, and you can see it on his face and, through the dialogue, etc. And same with Ryan Reynolds, that sort of desperation from Deadpool comes through with his performance, and that's why they're lucky to have two really good actors in these lead roles. But I think that overall story would have been better with just a little bit more meat on that bone. And I think that time could have come from the Cassandra Nova storyline. Emma Corrin was great, and their performance in the role isn't to blame. But Nova's ultimate function in the story was to try to destroy a timeline that was already being destroyed. I think you could restructure the movie without Nova and keep the stakes pretty much the same. Deadpool's still trying to save his timeline. They still need to find a new anchor being, so he has to go find the new Wolverine. I think that the main antagonist could still be Paradox in the TVA. They still go to the Void. You can still bring in these characters. I think you could have somebody as the overlord of the Void that is one of those returning legacy characters, like a Johnny Storm, that wouldn't necessarily have to be the big bad of the movie. I think you could do almost everything the movie's already doing, but without having to devote all that time to Nova. You could put a little bit more in the front end with Deadpool, a little bit more in the middle with Wolverine, and I think the story would feel just a little bit more complete. Honestly, Matthew Macfadyen's Paradox was a great antagonist. He hit a very specific note of Britishness that I really love. It's like the domineering wimp, a character of great ability that also collapses under the slightest bit of pressure. He does hysterics very well. And I hope that this isn't the last time that we've seen him matching up against Deadpool. And if you want to talk about him as the potential primary antagonist, listen, I found overreaching corporate ambition to be a far more believable reason for being a bad guy than Nova's decision to eliminate all the timelines and only rule over the Void. And it would also be sort of a low stakes reason for someone to be a villain, which makes sense in this Deadpool franchise. We've got a lot more to break down about Deadpool and Wolverine, but before we do, I want to thank my partner for this video. This video is brought to you by AG1. My weeks are pretty crazy. Sometimes I'm sitting in front of my computer for hours hunting and researching information for videos. Other times I'm on the road to catch a screening. So it's important that I'm able to find some consistency in doing the best things for my health. That's why no matter what I'm doing, I'm glad that I can start off each day with AG1. AG1 is a foundational nutrition supplement that delivers daily nutrients and gut health support and is backed by multiple research studies so you can trust what you're putting in your body. And I get it. Everybody wants to make sure that they're paying attention to what they put in their body. That's why AG1's in-house team of doctors and scientists works with third-party experts to validate the benefits of AG1, and it is backed by multiple studies and trusted by experts and medical professionals. My hours can get really weird, and I need to make sure that when I need the energy to work, that I have it. AG1 contains ingredients that support sustained energy, which helps me to be the best Dan that I can be every day. If I had to recommend one product to support whole body health, it's AG1, and that's why I'm excited to have them as a partner on the show. Starting your journey with AG1 is a win. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3K2 and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase at drinkag1.com/Dan. That's drinkag1.com/Dan. Check it out. One thing that I was very happy with was the humor in the movie. I loved when Wade addressed the camera about going to Disneyland and grabbed the boom microphone. I loved Deadpool telling Wolverine that he was joining the MCU at a bit of a low point and that Jackman would be doing these movies until he was 90. I enjoyed hearing Deadpool saying gubernatorial and his dig at Wolverine's costume looking like an LA Rams uniform. And I was a big fan of Nightspool's fourth wall break, just looking at the camera and saying the proposal. I'm laughing about it right now. I laughed a lot, and I would say that where the movie was most successful for me was as a comedy. The only really running bit that didn't fully deliver for me was Dogpool. I get it, the dog is like this perfect blend of cute and ugly, but there was so much time spent, and I felt like that we've done the cute, ugly dog bit in other films before, so it really wasn't necessarily that I thought that Dogpool wasn't funny, it was just sort of out of proportion with the amount of time that they spent on screen. The action I thought was almost uniformly fun. I liked the credit scene where Deadpool was fighting the TVA with Wolverine's bones, though the in-sync dance was a little bit random. I liked both big Deadpool Wolverine fights, especially the one in the car. Close quarters combat with two characters who use blades and can't hurt each other was extreme in all the right ways. And then I liked the scene of Deadpool and Wolverine versus the Deadpool Corps with that long sideways tracking shot. My biggest criticism of that would be that I don't think that the Wolverine cowl looked that cool in live action. I get why you have to do it because you're paying off on all of the Wolverine stuff and you've got all of the classic suits, etc. He's never worn that cowl in live action, but I think this movie kind of proved why it was maybe a great idea to not bring that over from the cartoons and from the comics, etc. Because it looks a little silly. And I know all superhero costumes look a little silly, but mainly it's because it made the top half of Hugh Jackman's face look like computer animated. And I think it might be because the eyes were in some way computer animated, and it just, I don't know. There was something that was just a little too, for lack of a better word, cartoony, which I know sounds stupid when we're talking about a movie that's this over the top. But, you know, I just don't think that it looked that great for them to devote basically the last 30 minutes to him wearing it. Some people may disagree with me, and that's fine. But I think that this was an example of having it right pretty much the first time and not bringing over a specific look from the comic books into live action. The only action sequence that really disappointed me was the fight between the Fox characters and Nova's forces in the Void. It was so shaky. And I wanted to see freaking Wesley Snipes chopping people up his blade and X-23 cutting her way through all of these different things. I love that we got to see an idea of what Gambit's powers would look like in an R-rated movie. I don't really know what the thinking was behind shooting it that way. Maybe they had to hide some stunt double stuff or hide the fact that people couldn't be there for the whole sequence. I'm not really sure, but I wish that they had found a workaround. Because that's the kind of scene where you're probably never going to see those characters doing that kind of scene together again. And I wanted that great spotlight in the way that we saw with the other action sequences in the movie that were all pretty well locked off. A lot of them in slow motion. You got a good look at Deadpool and Wolverine and everybody else doing their fighting. And yet we didn't really get that for this scene. So I covered the characters, I covered the cameos, I covered the humor, the action, the story, all of that stuff. So I guess really what's left is to kind of look at the big picture and also my thoughts on the movie, especially now having seen it a second time. If we're going to get more Deadpool movies, and I hope that we do, then I hope we can spend more time on his story and with the people he loves. And I'm curious what this greater purpose that Deadpool is meant to serve in the future is. I hope it's not dropped in future movies. Not every MCU movie is going to tonally support Deadpool as a character, and this may also be a bit controversial, but I'm totally fine with him existing over here on sort of Deadpool Island and then pulling MCU characters into his world instead of Deadpool being pulled into the world of other MCU characters. I do want payoff for the Thor thing. Why was Thor holding Deadpool and crying? I'm not saying that he should be inconsequential to the overall story of the MCU, but I don't think that you should try to merge that tone necessarily with some movies where it wouldn't be a great fit. Regardless, this does kind of open the door to Hugh Jackman being the MCU's Wolverine, though I suspect that they'll be casting their own and perhaps deploying Jackman sparingly. And I think we're also going to learn a lot more over the next few years what Marvel's plans are with the existing legacy characters that they can now pull in through the multiverse. Overall, on second viewing, I would say that my feelings didn't really change that much from the first viewing. I think it's a really funny movie. I think it's a great time. It's a blast to watch. I think most of the action is really good. I think the performances are still really good. But at the same time, I think it's a movie where the pieces individually are more impressive than the whole when you look back at the totality of it. I can relate to the people who are saying that it's their favorite MCU movie in years. And I can also relate to the people who are disappointed and found it mediocre and or lacking. That's not me riding the fence or being indecisive or not making up my mind or any of the other things that people say. That's me just acknowledging that both of those feelings exist inside of me to a certain extent. However, for me, the good still wins out over the bad. And I think that it is a testament to Ryan Reynolds and his grasp of the character and being able to co-write along with his other writers a movie that's legitimately funny, legitimately has heart, is creative in what they decided to bring out, is creative in designing most of the action scenes. That, I think, is what saved this from being completely mediocre, because that's where I felt that it was as far as the story structure and how everything was put together. It's a better Deadpool movie than an MCU movie, and I think that people's reactions so far have largely been driven by exactly what they were looking for when they were going in. This is sort of uncharted territory because there were a lot of people that were just going in for Deadpool, but for the first time you have the MCU fans that are also going in saying, okay, well, what are the stakes for the MCU as a whole, and how are you going to incorporate that into this movie? And for Deadpool's first outing, there wasn't a whole lot of that. So, I get it, but at the same time, it was a fun movie, and, it's one that I'm probably just going to throw on whenever I just want to have a good time. Is it going to be one of the MCU movies that I probably rewatch the most? I doubt it, but it is going to be one of the ones that you can pretty much put on any time because it's a fun action comedy. And I think to a certain extent, those have always been Deadpool's aspirations. It's just that over the years, so much more has been stacked on top of that. So those are my spoiler thoughts on Deadpool and Wolverine. What do you think? Have you already been out to the theater to see it? I sure hope so, because I just spoiled the crap out of the movie. Let me know down in the comments below. And of course, stay tuned right here. I'll be covering the box office on Monday with what looks to be a record-breaking opening for an R-rated film. We'll see how it stacks up against the rest of the MCU. And of course, so much more here on the channel. Movie reviews, movie news, all of that stuff. Be sure to check out my partner AG1 down in the comments below. And be sure to click subscribe and stay tuned right here on the channel. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.